Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Cosmic Leadership. I'm so excited to be with you today because I had the most incredible conversation with this beautiful holistic health doctor that I can't wait to introduce you to. Today's podcast is a little bit longer because she and I just could not stop talking, quite frankly. She's fascinating. I also just wanted to let you know that I am having a love event. I tend to have a free love event every year. Not free love like 1965. I mean, free as in no cost. And I do this event in order to offer you a taste of what it's like to work with me, either one on one or in a group class. This year, we will be focusing on self acceptance. As many of you know, if you've been following my work, I have about 15 years of experience as a therapist and also as a neuroscience researcher. And I've found over the years that the number one determining factor in whether people find their person or whether they end up staying with their person is this idea of self-acceptance. It's such an impossible concept. I myself am working on it now. I'm always working on it. I think that we live in a culture that shoves down our throats that we have to be a certain way, talk a certain way, look a certain way, especially if we identify as women. And so then in my opinion anyway, the ante gets raised even higher and higher for how perfect and kind and yet very strong and self-supporting, but also beautiful and having hours a day to spend time on I'm using quotation marks, self-care, the kind of self-care that makes us look good, right? And I think that this cultural norm, so to speak, makes it even harder for us to reach a place of self-acceptance. I am also going through my own journey of self-acceptance in terms of my medical stuff, and we talk about that a little bit in today's conversation with Dr. Erica Matluck. I think that as we all work more and more towards self-acceptance, the more self-love we can find, the more love we are able to find in our friendships, business relationships, romantic partnerships, or whatever the case may be. So I encourage you to join us for my event on love. It takes place on Sunday, February 12th at 5 p.m. Eastern Time. So 5 p.m. Eastern Time. I've put up the link for you to join us in the show notes here. So I encourage you to head over to the show notes in your favorite podcast player and click the link and just sign up for our event. You'll receive a Zoom link via email very soon after. And I really, really look forward to seeing you. I can't wait to spend time with all of you. We're going to do a meditation, some breath work, and then get into a transformational healing process to help us all become more self-accepted beings. And now I look forward to introducing you to Dr. Erica Matluck. She is one of the most incredible podcast guests I've ever had personally. And I think that her idea of the 4 quadrants of self is shaking the medical community in such a great and beautiful way. Without any further ado, here is today's episode. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Cosmic Leadership Podcast. I'm so happy to have you with us today. I am excited to chat with our guest because she and I share a lot in common. Not only a search for home beyond New York, but also a lot of similar opinions about holistic healthcare and the wellness situation in our country and abroad, as well as many others. Her name is Dr. Erica Matluck, and she is a modern medicine woman and the creator of 7 Senses, a holistic framework for healing and transformation. She's trained as a naturopathic doctor, family nurse practitioner, Reiki Master, and multidisciplinary yoga instructor. Combining the over a decade of experience working in conventional and alternative medicine, she brings a truly holistic lens to well-being, addressing the physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual aspects of health. Ancient wisdom and Eastern philosophy thread through all of her work, which has been featured in Harpers Bazaar, Mindbodygreen, Well and Good, Vogue, and Women's Health. I'm so happy to have her with us today. Join me as we welcome Dr. Erica Matluck.
Thank you.
So tell us a little bit about how you got interested in holistic medicine. What's the story?
Yeah, the story is a long one. It's both personal and professional, and I guess how those two things ultimately merged. My interest really started as a very young girl. When I was 11, I lost my mother. She had lung cancer.
Sorry.
It was caught, thank you. It was caught relatively late. And I was a sensitive kid, like many of us are who end up in these lines of work. And I even remember today being, 11 and in the hospital and just sort of like contracting at her treatment, at, watching the way that she ended her life. And, of course, at that time in my life, I didn't understand any of the, medical things that were going on. But I did feel like we weren't in a healing container. Obviously, I didn't have that language then, but I felt it. And I can kind of go back to that time in my life and still feel it. So we lost my mother. And a few years later, I fell in love for the first time. And the boyfriend that I was with, his father had also been diagnosed with a cancer, very different kind of cancer. But he went down to a clinic in Mexico and did these macrobiotic diets and IV nutrient therapy and really took like a completely alternative approach after his conventional doctors in the States had given him a 6-month prognosis. Okay. And he went into remission and he healed.
Okay.
And I'm not like trying to oversimplify this because they had very different cancers, very different situations. But watching this, being the observer of this, planted a seed in me that, like, really a seed of, wow, there are a lot of different ways to heal. There are different ways to do medicine, and the sort of like righteous activist in me was like, I don't want another child to lose their mother over cancer. I'm going to learn other ways to do this. And, that really is what set me on the path, which has taken me in a lot of different directions. I did study pre-med as an undergrad, but I majored in anthropology with the idea of like sort of merging the intersection of culture and health. And with an interest in exploring how people around the world heal. I wasn't sure as an undergrad if I wanted to be a provider or practitioner, but I did think that I would want to do graduate work. And I thought it would be really interesting to do graduate work with like, indigenous communities or people abroad who are not using conventional Western medicine. Yeah. And funny that later in life, I did end up going to the Amazon and doing a lot of work there, but by way of a doctorate in naturopathic medicine, a master's in nursing, and a lot of other things.
Great. Oh, I just have so many questions for you. I'm in love with all kinds of indigenous healing. I used to work for the United Nations and I worked all over the world. And I just remember having contracted a few different, what they would call tropical diseases, which are not just tropical diseases, but that's what a allopathic doctor called them. And I tried all different kinds of antibiotics and even IV antibiotics at one point. And what ended up working for me was this tea made of papaya seeds and a few other herbs that my landlady made me. And that knocked it right out and I was fine. And every time I got that kind of sick again, and they don't, in that particular, it was East Timor. The country was East Timor. It's a little country between Australia and Indonesia. Every time I got that particular kind of sick again, nobody was interested in like, oh, let's diagnose this. What is it called? What are the different things that we could try? They're just like, nope, here's your teas. You'll be fine. And I would be fine in 3 or 4 days. And so I'm very obsessed with that whole idea. I would love to hear more about your experience of learning in the Amazon.
Well, first I just want to comment on what you just shared, because I think there's so much to dive into, even in your story. And the first thing that came up for me when I heard that, they put you on antibiotics and then they weren't effective. And then you tried this tea. And it just sort of reminds me, as I consider myself a bridge, I'm not anti-Western medicine at all. I think it saves lives. I spent 10 years of my career working in that environment, and I have tons of colleagues that I respect. But there is definitely an arrogance to it. There's an arrogance that's also narrow-minded. Mm-hmm. And that ultimately is the thing for me that I think will be the demise of Western medicine, right? Because this idea that okay, you have this tropical disease.
Right.
We're not connected to it. We don't have that. That disease is not endemic where we live. And yet we have the answer. We have the only treatment. Mm-hmm. This is what you have to do, and this will work, right? And then often if it doesn't work in the conventional medical environment, they just throw something stronger at it.
Right.
And there's never really this open-mindedness to say, hey, why don't we have a chat with colleagues across the world who are actually living side by side with this condition.
Right.
And, I think for me as a Western trained practitioner, a lot of people sometimes will talk about naturopathic medicine as if it's an Eastern modality. It's not. It's Western. Right. We learn physiology, we dissect brains, we do gross anatomy lab, we learn pharmacology. It's more holistic and integratively minded, but it's Western. So, I am still trained in this diagnosis and treatment sort of way to look at disease. And not my first time, I guess I say, there was a point in my work in the Amazon where I was multiple hours walk from a road.
Mm-hmm.
And I realized that I was sort of putting my trust in these healers that approached well-being and health and disease very, very differently than I did. Right. So just simple example, I was doing something called the dieta, which involves a lot of fasting and then consuming a master plant that you learn from. And then there are ayahuasca ceremonies that happen throughout the plant dieta. And you're really just sort of using the ayahuasca, the psychedelic nature of the plant, as an interface to meet the master plant that you're learning from. And this is part of the tradition. And one of the ways that the healers or the curanderos, they learn to transmit the healing properties of the plants through them into the patients. And, so fasting is not always comfortable. And I was having the experience where I was feeling really weak and a lot was starting to come up, emotional, mind,
right.
monkey mind stuff. And I just had the thought, what if I had a UTI out here? Okay. What if I had a UTI that became a kidney infection, right? I'm in silence. I'm not drinking water. I'm not eating food. I am in a container where I can't take anything. Okay. And I'm multiple hours walk from a facility, right? And sort of so that Western brain in me was oh my God, this is not healthy. Right? Yeah. This is terrible. What am I doing to myself? And that sort of was this really big moment for me, because I realized I had to let go of that dogmatic thinking. I had to let go of the arrogance that this way that I'd been trained at the end of the day is the right way.
Right.
I had to let it go to open up to all of this wisdom and all of this knowledge of these people in the jungle, right? They've been healing and treating probably UTIs their own way for thousands of years.
Right.
And it was sort of can I drop my ego, my academic ego, and consider the fact that I'm a stranger here in foreign land and they know way more about how to work with the things that are going to come up in this environment than my, 6 years of training and decade of experience. And that's really humbling. And I also think, that's part of the journey, both for a patient and a practitioner, to hold space for the fact that like the mystery will always be a part of everything. There will always be an unknown quality. Right. And rather than fighting that or band-aiding that or pretending that that doesn't exist, which I think allopathic medicine does very well.
Yeah.
For me, it's about how do we want to relate to that? Mm-hmm. How do we want to relate to the fact that there's always going to be an unknown quality?
And that is part of, I think, the fear that comes up for people too when there's an illness or something going on. It's like, what is this? And how do I relate to it? Because right now it's deeply impacting my life in a negative way. And so probably the first thing is to deal with the fear part.
Right. And then so what that brings up for me is like, what does it mean to deal with the fear part? Right. I think, a conventionally medically trained provider would probably say dealing with the fear means making the fear go away. And what I would say is dealing with the fear means that we need to create enough safety for you to feel the fear. Right. And like you see this theme coming up a lot in the way that people are working with psychedelics today, which I think is really interesting, right? Psychedelics are a really good platform for entering that unknown space, right? It's scary. And so rather than saying, let's not do that because it's too scary, or get over your fear because it's irrational, we say, let's create a set and setting where you feel safe. Let's bring in a practitioner that can hold the space, that's, highly experienced in those realms. Let's create a setting where there's soft lighting and the right music, and soft blankets and comfortable cushions. And let's get you to a place where you feel safe enough to actually feel the vibration of fear and let it move through you.
Right. And that tends to be my job as a practitioner. I'm a therapist and a neuroscientist, and I created my own healing modality called transformational healing. And one of the first things that we do is we move into a space with our guides. So, if people come to me and they don't believe in spirit guides, that's okay. But let's hold that possibility open that your spirit guides are right next to you. Perhaps they're making a circle, a protective, loving circle around you and holding you. And we call in source energy to work with us as well. And that tends to make the space safe enough for them to feel the fear or feel the sadness or the grief or whatever needs to move through them at that time. I think, though this is we don't usually use the word allopathic when we talk about therapy, but this is a more, trained therapeutic approach. I think EMDR does a really great job of that with recovery from trauma too, where you, in the first few sessions, you do something called resourcing, where you put yourself in a safe place. You create your own safe place. Is it your bed? Is it a place that we've never seen before? It can be anything. And so I really support that idea of creating a space that's safe enough to feel that fear or anger or whatever the and I'm using quotes for those of you not watching the podcast but listening, feeling whatever the unpleasant emotional component of that is also.
Well, I would even add to that like one of the most important components to the safety of your container is you and your training and the fact that you understand the hows and the whys, right? Because for a lot of people, I'm not sure exactly who your clients are, but a lot of people out there, even when you get into talking about source energy and bringing in their guides, they might perceive that sense of safety, but their mind still might be like, that's hocus pocus, or it's too woo-woo, just because of the cultural climate that we operate in. But like what I love about what you bring to the table as a neuroscientist and as a therapist is you make them feel safe because you have that grounding in something that they know and maybe feel a little bit more comfortable with. I can very much relate to you as a practitioner, because I can get pretty woo-woo, and, I don't think it's woo-woo,
Right.
but like oftentimes it's the fact that I can explain to someone why and how, their thoughts or their emotions or the vibe they feel is impacting their nervous system or their endocrine system and impacting their the state of their physical body. And I often think with people today that if they can understand the why, that makes them feel safe, because it's like, okay, this makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. I so agree with you. What do you find most often when you're working with so before we go any further, I'm sorry, I should first explain. You work with people one-on-one, but you also work with groups, right?
Yes.
Okay. So what do you most often find in people with endocrine system issues, like thyroid issues? What is that usually linked with?
It really depends, So I very much consider my work holistic. And so rather than approaching this just from like a specific condition, let me reshape a little bit
Please.
the way I'm going to respond to it, because I think that the practice of medicine or coaching or transformational work, it's both an art and a science. And the diagnosis is a piece of it, but I almost think of the diagnosis as like the tip of the iceberg, right?
Yeah.
And what is under the diagnosis, right? So obviously there's a reason why one person's body manifests some dysfunction as hypothyroidism and another person manifests as PCOS or some sort of, menstrual irregularity or something, or infertility. And those are very subtle differences. And I would almost equate that to like the difference between, this is just an example, but like fear of abandonment is like your deep core wound that you just kind of keep being driven by unconsciously. And someone else's is like, fear of not being accepted or loved by their community, right? These things, they're very subtly different, right? So, for example, like someone could be really overwhelmed with fear in their life. And one person, that fear could be driven by, well, if I show you who I really am, you might leave me. I won't be loved. It's not safe to be who I am in this world. And for another person, it might be, I'm afraid of my power. I'm afraid to be seen and heard. And these like subtle differences are very important in my assessment.
Right.
So I like to start by really understanding, like, what is the thing underneath all the things? And then I can usually start to understand why it's presenting as a hypothyroidism versus PCOS or infertility or something else.
Yeah.
But how we treat it is holistic, right? So I would say the science to it is knowing how it all works, knowing how, something that happened in your childhood that remains unresolved is impacting your mind, your beliefs and thoughts, is impacting your emotional state, which both of those impact your nervous system function and then your endocrine system. And, and then that impacts the physical body.
Right.
Right. So there's first like the science of why, and I call this the technology of self, understanding how these different quadrants of ourselves work. In other words, what is the language that they speak? And then part of my assessment is figuring out which one of those quadrants do we need to start in. And everyone I work with, we're going to work with all four of the quadrants, the physical, the mental, the emotional, spiritual. But the art of the practice is, where do we need to begin?
Right.
In some people, that means like, you're a finance dude working on Wall Street and someone referred you to me and I'm super woo-woo and hippie, and you just like, the physical body is really the only part of the self that you feel like
needs attention.
Exactly. So maybe that's where we need to start for that person. But a lot of people come to me and they sort of know that they're stuck in one area of self, and they feel this longing to experience themselves in a different way, but they don't know how to get there. And in those people, we might want to start in one of the quadrants that they feel less comfortable in.
Yeah.
But, so regardless, though, in my work with someone, we are going to touch all of those, right? Mm-hmm. So we may use physical tools like diet or exercise or supplements or medication changes, right? We may do some work with the mental body, which for me, the mental and the emotional quadrants of self are something that I think in the dominant conversation get sort of merged into one a lot, right? Like as a therapist, you're working with people's emotions all the time.
Very
but
true.
we
but
call
also
it
spirituality too.
And spirituality too. But the way that I work, I would say it's like a real disservice to muddy the waters between mental and emotional health. Because for me, our mental health is really our thoughts and beliefs. Like this is where the placebo effect lives. Mm-hmm. This is why we need to get people on board with what it is we're going to do.
Right.
And if they are on board, right, they believe in it, that when you talk about source energy, that someone's like, yes, I can like get my mind behind that. Our outcomes are usually better than if someone's like, oh, that's quackery. Like, I don't believe in that. Same goes for medications.
Yeah.
We know this. Research has shown this. Yeah. The birth control that a woman tends to be most compliant with is the one that she asked her provider for, as opposed to the one that her provider wants to recommend. So to me, that's the mental quadrant of self. And the emotional quadrant of self is emotion. It's feeling. And where I think we often get in our own way is that rather than just feeling things, my almost 2-year-old son is the greatest teacher of this. He just like moves through these waves. He doesn't need us to figure out why. He doesn't need to justify why he's having a tantrum because I offered him cheese and he doesn't want it. Like, he doesn't need to get into the mind about it. He just needs to move it with his voice, with his tears, with his body. But as adults, we're like, why am I sad? Why am I angry? Why don't I feel happy? What's wrong with me? Right? And then I come up into my mind and I scan my life. And you and I both know at any point we could scan our lives and we could find dozens of things to feel appreciative of and gratitude for and joy around. And we could find just as many things to problematize, things that are wrong, right? So as soon as I find that thing that rationalizes my feelings, all of my attention goes on that thing. And then I create more of that feeling by focusing my attention, right? So I think that understanding these quadrants of self is so important because we relate to reality and ourselves differently in the different quadrants of self. And so I would use different tools.
Okay.
Depending upon which quadrant is like, the heart of the matter.
Right. So can you explain a little bit more why you would like kind of move the mental quadrant away from the emotional quadrant?
Well, yeah. So I don't want to say I'd move them away because they're
Okay.
absolutely connected and I want to honor that. But the way that we work with them, the way that I work with them is distinctly different because like I think about the mental quadrant as one of the ways that we project outside of the inner self. We create our reality with our thoughts and our beliefs. And then we're highly sensitive to that reality through our emotions. So it's almost like they're moving in different directions. Not entirely, because we could also talk about the way our emotions magnetize in things, right? So, of course, our emotions also can create. But I would say the general quality of these two quadrants of self, I have this image, this graphic that I made that I write a lot about on Instagram. And I came up with it to try and capture this idea. I'm not a digital creator. So like there are limitations to my 2D depiction, but the way I show it on the graphic is that the mental and the spiritual quadrants have arrows moving out away from the inner self. And then the physical and the emotional quadrants have arrows pointing in. And so, for example, if let's say we're working on, let's say it's Hashimoto's thyroiditis, right? Let's say it's an autoimmune issue. And at the core of an autoimmune issue is like some sense of confusion about what's safe and what's not, right? My immune system is not quite sure.
Yeah.
Rather than protecting myself from things that are actually harmful, I'm attacking myself.
Right.
Right. So in the mental quadrant, that is really me examining like, what are my thoughts and beliefs about my safety?
Yeah.
What's going on in here? When I lay my head to rest at night, what's going on in here when like I'm not conscious of my thoughts? I'm just going for a walk.
Yeah.
Where is my mind going? And a lot of the way I would work with what's in the mental quadrant is starting to become aware of those thoughts, is catching those thoughts, reframing those thoughts, and sort of like examining some of those core beliefs that maybe just aren't true or aren't relevant anymore. They might be from an earlier time when they really were relevant, right? A lot of us did experience real dangers when we were children in our home environments or otherwise. And we developed these core belief systems that like were really necessary for our survival and to keep us safe. But maybe they're outdated now, right? And we need to sort of like connect back into that and do the work of like writing a new story.
Yes.
But to me, that's distinctly mental work. Whereas emotional work in that particular scenario might be changing our relationship with how we experience fear and anxiety, right? Rather than wanting that fear to just go away, emotionally bypassing it, plowing through it, talking ourselves out of it, we're like actively going to feel it.
Right.
In a set and setting that makes us feel safe.
Right. And allow it to move through us until it passes, because it will pass eventually. It's just, you have to let it in before it can happen, usually. I've found anyway.
That's right. And like, you know, I used to say this all the time, even before I was a mother. And now that I have a young child, I like realize how you know, profound of a thought it was. But like when we're doing, a lot of people these days are talking about inner child work. And it's like, when you're working with your inner child, or you're working with a real child, if the ball rolls into my son's room and going to get it means that I'm out of sight and he's afraid, I'm not going to tell him to just push through his fear. I'm not going to tell him he's being irrational.
Right.
He's 2.
Yeah.
Right. I'm going to go over there and I'm going to hold his hand and I'm going to walk with him in the room. Right. And so like when we're dealing with a lot of these old fears, these deep anxieties that are often still impacting our adrenal health. And you see all these coaches out there like telling people to, puff up with courage and just do it.
Yeah.
That doesn't work for the inner child.
I know. I always say to people, what would your favorite parent do in that moment? Like, we have to learn how to parent ourselves, So if you're really freaked out about something, if you had your dream parent there, what would they do? And then do that. Sometimes it really is getting in bed under the covers and watching a stupid show for an hour just to kind of breathe and be safe in your bed. And that's okay.
And sometimes it's like being okay with just not being ready yet, too. So that's another, it's like time is such a beautiful medicine in so many ways when we use it intentionally, and to accept yourself in where you're at, which sometimes is like, I'm not ready to open my heart again. I'm not ready to face this fear. I'm not ready to come out to my parents. I'm not ready to quit my job.
Right.
It's like also sometimes like that acknowledgement and acceptance can be really, really deep work.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's particularly hard for us in this particular time period also, because I think what we've all been through collectively as a world over the last couple of years has been so fear-based.
Yes.
That now everyone is just like, I don't even know who my favorite parent is. I don't even know what I want. I don't even know what is going to soothe me. And I'm not okay with it because every ad that I see on television or conversation I have with someone is like, we're getting back to I'm making air quotes now for those who are not watching. We're getting back to normal. Well, what is that? And do we want to? And didn't normal not work for us last time? Are we going to just repeat? It just, as a therapist, it's frustrating because I want everyone to feel that self-acceptance, but every message we take in from society at this moment is like, don't accept yourself and your own fears and your own stuff.
Well, and even this idea of going back somewhere.
Right.
In
air quotes, back.
Is like, right. But there are so many ways in like the healthcare industry that concept is like, people believe in that concept, right? Like, I used to feel good. I now have this condition. I just want to get back to where I was. And the reality is we never get back because we're dynamic and our cells are dying and new ones are being born, every moment. And this isn't a bad thing, right? But it's like, if our goal in healing is to go back to somewhere we once were, there's got to be a lot of sort of mindset and reorientation to self in that work. Because the one thing I will say, and I spent like the first 10 years of my career working in conventional medicine, mostly with people who had sort of mystery illnesses, chronic conditions that weren't responding well to the conventional treatments. And the one thing I'll say is that I don't think I've ever worked with someone, and we're talking tens of thousands of people, because of course, when you work in a conventional setting, you work with a high volume. I don't think I've ever worked with someone that eventually didn't come to a place with their chronic condition where they found a gift, where they saw the light, where they found some meaning in the suffering. And I don't say this without compassion, because I know when we're going through it in those dark nights of the soul, no one has the answer. We don't know how long it's going to last. It's tough.
It is.
It is not for the faint of heart. These are the healers of our time. And, that's the mystery piece. Right? There's no rheumatologist or oncologist out there who can really tell you with certainty what the prognosis is, when you're going to feel better, how you're going to feel. But I can't promise much, but I can promise that eventually some meaning or purpose or gift or lesson will be found in that journey.
Absolutely.
And that's why we don't want to go back. We want to go somewhere new.
Yeah.
We want to go somewhere better.
Better is the key. I've had a really long medical history for the last 8 or 9 years with environmental illness, mold illness, and environmental sensitivities, and multiple chemical sensitivity. And it all started to show me a gift, but I wasn't ready to see that gift. The gift was my intuitive abilities and my ability to channel different guides. But I was so unready for it. Like we were talking about earlier, I was just like, no, I don't care about that. I want to do my regular life. I want to have my regular job. I can't even do my regular job anymore. This is what I've wanted my whole life. And it took me so long to really accept and to say, okay, this is a chronic condition. I don't know how to heal it right now. So I need to make the best of my life right now with where I am. And I did heal a lot of it. Like I was in a wheelchair for a year and a half. Now I can hike, which is beautiful, but there's still a lot of physical things that I have to deal with. But the gift is that the universe was trying to figure out how to get me out of that work environment so that I could do what I do now. So I could create transformational healing and work with people who needed it. Which was actually, I thought at the time, was a very small calling compared to what I used to do for the United Nations. It's actually a really huge calling. And so we can't always see what that gift is at that time. It took me probably 5 years before I could really see it. And I find new layers of it all the time still. And I'm not by any means saying that we have to go through hell to get the gift. I think I could have received my gift even without that illness, but that was the way it played out because I was so resistant and I was so stuck and wouldn't move forward. So I like what you said about not moving back to quote unquote normal, but moving to a better place.
And thank you for sharing that. It's such a beautiful story and it's not uncommon. And I agree with you that it's like, yeah, you don't necessarily have to go through hell to find your gift, but like suffering is grace, right? And I think your story is really important for a lot of people to hear because in the like new age metaphysical wellness world, you see a lot of people wanting to like open the third eye or develop these abilities to channel or mediumship or connect with guides and stuff, and like as if it's like doesn't come without challenge.
Right.
Like
that's true.
We were born into bodies. We were, like it or not, like we were born into bodies in this world on the earth. And if all of your energy is focused on like trying to get out of the body to access realms of experience that are outside of the body, like that's not going to be easy because you're in a body.
Ooh. Yeah.
And if you came in with these abilities, these sensitivities, and like no one taught you as a child how to integrate them, which very few of us had, parents who could sort of like shepherd that and teach us about it. It's going to be challenging to figure that out. And I think that that's a really important message for people, that like being a highly sensitive person is not comfortable in this world.
Right. It's not. And I think that I talked about this with your friend, Dr. Ellen Vora, too, when she was on the podcast. But I do think that we are the the warning signs for society, people. Okay, without getting too preachy, there are some in this world who don't believe in climate change and who truly think that the science is not correct. But, we're living proof. Like the environmental pesticides and all of the things that are around us in the air all the time are causing an effect on some people. And so we're the warning sign for the rest of the world. Like, hey, we got to do something here, something different.
I want to give you a reframe because rather than being a warning sign, I think you're a leader.
Ooh,
I think you're a leader because like you're waking up to what's going on and then you're like taking appropriate action in your life. You told me you moved to New Mexico, you're growing your own food, you're creating a cleaner, less toxic world for yourself in community. Like you're a leader.
Awesome.
So, yeah, I think that's really beautiful. And I also think that like you're a great teacher for a lot of these people that are arriving on the path and just want to like shoot up into the upper chakras. I do a lot of work with the chakras in the sense that like I use them as sort of an archetypal map of the self. And
Great.
I always think it's so interesting how you get all these people who really just want to like open the third eye, right? The third eye is really popular. Open the throat chakra and use the voice. But the rishis believed that it was a soul's greatest honor to be born into a body, right? To like be able to experience the world, the sensory pleasures of the world, which of course there's sensory pain too. But and then like the work really is not just shooting out of the body into the spiritual experience of self, but it's like how to be all of it.
Yes. How to integrate everything.
Your practice is like, there's a somatic piece of it. There's a connection to the part of you that is in the great mystery. And I think that really is like the work of our time, is like coming back to balance with that of like, yes, like being in a body is like incredibly sacred and spiritual and beautiful.
Agreed. And it's how we can relate to the rest of the world in the way that we were born into this form. I think it's really important. It's an important learning experience for a soul too.
And you talk about some of the things that you're sensitive to, right? Like it's how we relate to the earth. It's how we relate to our food. It's how we relate to, our sunscreens or the chemicals in the things that we consume. And that's like, it's just, you're such like a beautiful example of the merging of spirit and matter, because
thank you.
To be highly sensitive to, the realms of the great mystery, you have to take care of the temple.
Yeah, there's no other way.
The temple has to be a clean, clear space for the light to come through.
Absolutely. And I find that most of us who do this type of work, this holistic work that you and I do, we have to spend more time taking care of our temple than most. Or I should say we get to spend more time taking care of our temple.
And also, as we age, as we get closer to the great mystery that we all eventually go to and we all came from, we have to spend more time taking care of the temple. And like, that's not unintentional, right? That's not like not intelligent design. Source, God, whatever you want to call it, is so incredibly intelligent that there's like definitely a reason for that, why we have to start really taking care of the temple as we move closer to end of life.
Yeah. It's beautiful.
It really is. And I also think, what the like direction we just went on, it sort of leads me back to just like the holistic nature of health and how important it is, because it's like, if you're not looking at the whole picture, right? And we could go a lot of different directions with that, right? The whole of the self, the way I think of it, is inclusive of the physical, mental, spiritual, emotional, but it's also inclusive of the earth, the cosmos, right? The field that we're in, the climate, the seasons, right? All of these things, it's all, our environment is also part of the whole. And so then after you and I could probably talk for hours and hours and hours about how we see subtle relationships between someone's body and some of these environmental forces.
Yeah.
And then you look at what's going on in like a conventional clinic in the United States, where someone goes in with their symptoms and they're given a script and then they're on their way. And you realize like how much they're missing.
I know. It is heartbreaking also. But I have to say, we talked about this a little bit before the podcast. We both really subscribe to this idea of holistic medicine. And this is why I love working with naturopaths like yourself. But even the functional medicine clinics sometimes are kind of doing the same thing, where they take your symptoms and you talk a little bit more than you would in a regular allopathic doctor's office. But then you're given a script of supplements to take, which is still just a bunch of pills. So, sometimes the supplements are really helpful, but if the root cause is something mental or emotional or spiritual, not going to help.
Yes. And so often I hear people talking about the root cause as like a diet, like diet is the root cause, or, lack of exercise is a root cause. Like, that's not the root cause. The root cause is why your diet is the way your diet is, right? Why you're making the choices that you're making. And, I'm careful not to overgeneralize, because I know people who practice functional medicine who are super holistic, and I know
I have one
doctors who are not. But I will say, I think that this co-opting of terms is really confusing for people. And, functional medicine being a big one, because functional medicine is really about exploring how the body functions, how the systems of the body are functioning. And one of the things a lot of functional medicine providers do is a lot of lab testing, and then coming up with treatment recommendations based on the lab work. And I always I'm a little bit weary of that, because it's like, are you treating the person or are you treating the labs? And of course, every provider is different, but I think it's really important as patients, clients, consumers, if holistic care is what you're seeking, to really interview who
do the research.
Your practitioners are. What does that mean to you? Because I know people who are holistic doctors that think that adding vitamin D to someone's, long list of medications makes them holistic. And that is by far not the whole of self.
Yeah, very true. And I also find that you can find a holistic doctor as an allopathic doctor just as easily as you can find one as a functional medicine doctor or a naturopath. It really is about the ethos of that individual.
Yes.
And so doing that interviewing, though it is annoying, it takes longer. You're like, I don't feel good and I want to feel better right now. Why do I have to keep doing this? It's so worth it. I interviewed 4 or 5 practitioners when I moved here to Santa Fe. And I actually live outside of Santa Fe, and there are no doctors really close by, but I can go into Santa Fe to have them. And the person that I'm working with is a nurse practitioner. She's foreign. She did not see the point of getting her MD here in our country, but she has her MD in her original country. And she found some very strange thing in my mouth that blocks my airway when I sleep. Who would ever think of this? Who would ever dream of that? And that also was affecting a lot of my mental space too. And so we're working on both of those things together. So it did take 3 or 4 months to set up care, but at least I did the interviewing and found the right person. Now I understand that you have a couple of programs, but they're almost full. Can you just share with us a little bit about them so that people are aware for next time?
Yeah, so I'm actually about to start my first program mentoring other providers and practitioners.
Yay.
This is new for me. I used to spend all of my time more working with, um, people who are working on their own selves and their own processes, and most of my private practice is that. But I'm about to take on the first group of mentees. We're starting February 7th, so I think that will probably air after we begin. But if we have practitioners that are listening that want to do that work with me, I'll probably be running it again. It's 6 months, so I won't be running it again probably till the fall.
But always good to start a waiting list.
It's really for either conventional providers, practitioners that are moving into private practice, people that want to turn their existing practices into more of a holistic offering, as well as people who have gone through coaching programs or certification programs, but really didn't get a lot of client experience. There will be a lot in this about sort of the art of client work.
Okay, great.
So I have that coming up with my partner, Paul Kuhn, who's a musician, sound practitioner, mystic, gene key reader, all kinds of wonderful things. We do retreats together. So our next retreat coming up is May. It's in Majorca at an old monastery.
Okay.
So, we typically do 2 a year. One in late spring, early summer, and one in the fall. So we have not announced our fall retreat yet. So if that's something people are interested in, they can stay tuned. Instagram, website are both great places to stay in the know.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. And Dr. Matluck, thank you so much for the work that you do. I'm really inspired by your work, and I'm sure many other people who are listening today are as well. Thank you for treating each person holistically.
Thank you for doing the same. And thank you for having me.